models. You'll have your own exam in front of you, like you won't have to walk through stations, and each question will have its own colored big picture, and then with the arrow, and then you'll be able to label them. Okay. It's very close to the study area of Access Pearson, where I ask you to do the practice quizzes, right? That would be highly beneficial to prepare you for the exam. Okay, so I would study the slides, and then if you want to know, oh, which ones are we responsible for and which ones we're not, the first two pages of the handouts are your study guides. They show you which ones, whatever's on the list, it means you're responsible for. If it's not on the list, then I'm not gonna ask you about it. And yeah, and then today we're gonna start lab 5 on the bones, okay? And then I will of course send you an announcement about the exam, you know how many questions, and to bring your computers with you and all that stuff, okay? So everything I said, you will receive this information again in an announcement, okay? Everyone, another thing, for the deadlines, everything is due midnight tonight. So if you are behind, please finish it. It's a hard deadline, okay? Tonight's deadline. And then I want you to finish everything else by next Monday midnight, because next Wednesday we have the lab exam, okay? All right. So let's go ahead and get started with lab 5, the axial and appendicular skeleton. And like I said, we're going to cover a little bit of tissues, bone tissues, axial skeleton, appendicular skeleton, and the joints. And then these are 4 chapters in the lecture. I published next week's lecture early just because chapter 9 joints is there in case anyone wants to go ahead and, you know, watch it early. It's there. If not, like, don't worry about it. It's not due anytime soon, okay? All right, so let's start with the skeletal system. Everyone, the skeletal system is very important. From now on, each week we're going to cover a different system of the body. Skeletal system is very important. In fact, it has many, many functions, and we cannot live without our skeletal system, okay? And then you will hear me say that about all of the systems. Oh, this is very important. We can't live without it, except for one system. I don't know if anyone wants to guess. There's one system that I tell you it's important, but we can survive without it. But all the other systems, I'm going to be like, oh, today we're going to do this system. It's very important, and we can't live without it. Which one is the one that we can live without it? No, that's important. We'll die without the lymphatics. They're all important. The only thing is the reproductive system. That's the only one that, you know, you can still survive. You know, it's not life or death. It's producing more life, you know, but there's others around for that. So, but all the other systems, I'm going to tell you every week, like it's important, and you won't survive, like you won't be able to live without it, okay? So some of the functions of the skeletal system is, for example, we have protection, you know, for example, our rib cage protects our lungs, our brain is protected by the skull, right? These are all bones that are protecting very precious, important organs of the body. They play a role in homeostasis, in mineral storage and acid-base homeostasis, like with calcium and potassium, sorry, phosphorus, and it's for electrolyte balances. Another thing we're gonna see when we talk about a little bit of the tissues or what is a bone made up of, we're gonna see that we have parts of the bones that we have the red bone marrow, which is responsible for making blood cells. And also, that's the top part. We call it epiphysis. We're going to learn about it. And then in the long bone, where we have the diaphysis, there's a part where we have the yellow bone marrow, and then yellow bone marrow is for fat storage. Obviously, the skeletal system helps us with movement, right? Because on top of our bones, we have our skeletal muscles that help us move our bones, right? And then that's how we move around. And then finally, the most important one is the support. The skeleton supports the weight of the body. Basically, when we're talking about a building, we say the skeleton of the building, right? Because the skeleton is what holds it together. And then it's the same case for us. Our skeleton, our bones is the skeleton, the structure of our human body, right? And then, you know, it supports us, right? And then here, the next couple of slides, it's introducing us different shapes of bones. We are not responsible to know, oh, this bone has this shape or this bone has the other shape, but the book does like a good job in introducing, oh, what are the different types of bones that we're gonna see in this lab, okay? And we have different shapes of bones, right? And then we have examples of different shapes of these bones that we're gonna see, okay? For example, the first shape is the long bone, right? The long bone, you can see it's the typical bone that we know, right? Like the typical one that we see in cartoons, the bone, right? It's the long bone. It's longer than it's wide. An example of a long bone is the humerus, right? The upper arm. And then we have short bones, right? We have short bones where they're not long, they're short and they have a width. For example, the trapezium, it's a carpal bone, right? It's a short bone, and then it's one of the bones here that we have, okay, that make up this part of the hand. And then we have flat bones. What is an example of a flat bone? The sternum, it looks like a tie, right? It's right here. It looks like a tie. And then the sternum, it's important. Sternum, where our rib cages, they come together like from the front and they get connected to the sternum, right? Does anybody want to guess? I know I'm jumping ahead, but our ribs, so from the front, they're connected to the sternum, and then from the back, they're connected to the vertebra, right? Our vertebral column, right? And then, of course, not all of them, only the region that's part of our thoracic region, right? All the ribs, one in the front, they're connected to the sternum. In the back, they're connected to the vertebra. But not all the ribs are connected to the sternum, right? We're going to see that we have some floating ribs. And then, by the way, around the lab, you'll see some skeletons. So there's one over there, or there's one over here, and one over here. So if you want to like just, if I say something, if you want to look at it, you can. It's around us. The next shape is irregular. Irregular shape means like it doesn't have an actual shape. You know, it's irregular. It's the vertebra. So we're going to see that the vertebra has a irregular shape. It has the body where each vertebra sits on top of each other. Does anybody remember what we have? What was that cartilage called in between the vertebra? I said that it provides a cushion so that our backbones don't sit on top of each other. Intervertebral discs, right? Good, good, good. Very close. Intervertebral discs. So we're going to be able to see that. And then the last one, it says sesamoid bone. An example of sesamoid bone is the knee bone. What do we call it? Patella, okay? So this is just like an introduction: humerus, the long bone, trapezium, short bone, sternum, the thigh, which is a flat bone. We're gonna learn, for example, for the sternum, we're gonna learn this top part, the body part, and this tail part. What is it called? We're gonna go a little bit more in details. Vertebra, we have many vertebra. This is the body, and then we have some bones here on the side that we're gonna see them articulating with the ribs, right? And only some of them, right? Not all of them are connected to ribs. Like we don't have ribs on our lower back region, right? Our lumbar region. And then this is the sesamoid bone, which is the patella. Next, everyone, let's cover a typical long bone and what is a bone made up of, okay? So here, everyone, we can see a long bone, all right? And then this is the external structure, and then here we have a frontal section of the bone, and then we can see what's inside of it, okay? So let's look at the external part first, okay? We have the top part of the bones, like these two endings, these two ends, right? The two extremities. These are called the epiphysis. What are the two extremities called? Epiphysis, right? And then we have this middle part of the long bone. It's called what? Diaphysis. What is it called? Diaphysis, okay? The top is epiphysis, the top two, the two outer extremities, epiphysis, diaphysis. And then somewhere in the middle between epiphysis and diaphysis, it's called metaphysis, which is something we cover in lecture, okay? So if you look at it, everyone, this is the humerus, right? It's the upper arm, the bone for our upper arm. And then we can see that this part is the part that is going to be connected to the shoulder, right? And then this head here, it says it's made up of hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is what type of a tissue? It's a So all the hard ones are connective tissues, right? Because if we see an epithelial tissue, we'll know it's an epithelial tissue. We'll know a muscle tissue. We'll know a nervous tissue. Connective tissues are the ones with cartilages and fibers and all that stuff, right? Hyaline cartilage, if you remember, it was the first one with the eyes, okay, chondrocytes and a lacuna, and it didn't have any fibers in the background. It only had extracellular matrix. Do you remember that tissue, just eyes and extracellular matrix, right? That was the hyaline cartilage. Anyways, it's made up of a cartilage. It makes up the joint, and then this type of joint is the ball and socket joint. So that circle part is gonna sit on the shoulder, okay? And then it's a type of a synovial joint. We'll talk about it when we get there. It's because we can do like all types of movements, right? We have other joints where it just holds the bones together, like it doesn't move, but this is one of the joints that does move, right? So it's like this ball and socket, right? And then it sits there, and then we can move our upper arm, right? Yeah, so that's made up of hyaline cartilage. And then let's look at the outer layer of the bone. What is it made up of? The outer layer of the bone? Periosteum. Periosteum is the outside layer, the outside sheet of the bone. I know we're doing the external part, but I just want to introduce something from the internal part. The inside is called endosteum, okay? Outside is called periosteum, inside layer is called the endosteum. All right, everyone, so this is the periosteum, and then you see some perforating fibers in here. Don't forget, bones are a type of a connective tissue. What are bones? Connective tissue, right? And then you can see these perforating fibers here. Also, we can see these artery here, nutrient artery, because bone is a cell, cells need nutrients, right? So we're gonna see those for the bones as well. And then we have some perforating fibers. Here we have nutrient foramen. Everyone, we're gonna see the term foramen a lot of times today. Foramen means opening, okay? Like any opening, like you'll see a name and then next to it, foramen, it means it's opening. And then we're gonna see it a couple of times today. This is the external structure of the long bone. Here on the other side, we can see the sectioned long bone. Everyone, still we can see the epiphysis here at the top, the epiphysis here at the bottom, and diaphysis here in the middle. And then in the epiphysis, we can see that we have spongy bone, right? So what are the two types of bones? We have spongy bone and we have compact bone. In the epiphysis, we have a spongy bone. And something interesting that we have here, and then it's mostly in the metaphysis, which is in between the both of them, we have something called the epiphyseal line, okay? This epiphyseal line, before it becomes epiphyseal line, at first it's an epiphyseal plate, and then we're gonna talk about this like in a couple of slides later. Epiphyseal plate, everyone, is made up of a cartilage tissue, and then as long as that epiphyseal plate is a plate and it hasn't turned into a line, it means that it's still cartilaginous, it hasn't been calcified, it means that that bone can still grow, okay? Because you know how like from childhood to adolescence years until a person reaches adulthood, our bones grow and grow and grow until it hits a certain age that our bones don't grow longer, right? They don't grow taller. So that's because the epiphyseal plate, it runs out of the cartilage, it turns into epiphyseal line, and then the bone and the person stops growing, okay? And then usually that happens like, I don't know, between 18 to 20s, early 20, right? And then the bones stop getting longer. And then that's the part for that. Also, remember the red bone marrow, right? We have a red bone marrow in our bones. That's where blood cells are produced, are formed. And then the blood cells are very important, especially the white blood cells, right? They play a big role in with our immune system. So They're made in the red bone marrow. And then when we get there, when we're talking about blood, we'll bring this up again. So it's not very important right now. And then here, so outside we said outside layer is called periosteum, inside layer is called endosteum. And then all the way in the middle, this is the medullary cavity. Usually medulla, we call it medulla, anything like that's the center layer, you know, it's called the medulla. So here we have the medullary cavity. And then everyone, do you see the diaphysis here on both sides? It's made up of compact bone. Do we all see that? Right? It's made up of a compact bone. And then here in the middle, right? So we said we have red bone marrow there. And then what do we have here in the diaphysis? Yellow bone marrow. And then we said yellow bone marrow is for fat storage, right? Good. And then this is epiphysis on the other side, and it's made up of spongy bones. So everyone, here we saw the long bone here. And then this is also structure of a long bone, but this is a sectioned long bone. We can see the inside of it. And then now that we have an idea of the long bone, how like we have these two, we have compact bones on both sides. Inside we have the endosteum and all that stuff. Let's take a small piece, a small section of the skull, and let's see what the bone is made up of that make our skulls. All right, and then we can see that it has, look, it has the outside layer, which is the periosteum, that's correct. And then do you see underneath it, we have a compact bone on both sides? Do you see that compact bone? And then in the middle, we have spongy bone that comes with red bone marrow, okay? So this is the internal structure of our skull. And then let's review some terms that we went over this, but today I want to go more into details, right? So we have to know what is an osteoblast, osteocyte, and osteoclast, okay? So everyone, these are cartoon images, and then this is a real image. If you look at a bone, like for example, the epiphysis of a bone under a light microscope, magnified this much. Osteoblast, osteocyte, and osteoclast. So before we get started, do you see the term osteon in all of these words, right? What is an osteon? Bone, right? And then do you remember what we said about blast? Like any term that has blast next to it, it means that makes like, right? To make more, right? It's a cell that makes more of that cell. It's gonna synthesize or produce more of that cell. So if it's osteoblast makes more bone cells, right? Because it's osteoblast. So osteo is for bones, blast is for producing more cells, right? Osteoblast is to make more bone cells. So everyone, this is how it starts. So you'll see on the sides, we'll have osteoblasts. And then by the way, osteoblast is a cell. Look, this is a cell. It has a nucleus, just like this one, just like this one, okay? It's a typical cell. The job of this cell is to make more bone cells. So everyone, the osteoblast, you'll see it here on the side. And then this osteoblast, eventually, it's gonna make its way into the cellular matrix where we have the bone. And then this osteoblast is gonna turn into osteocyte, okay? This osteoblast here, it's gonna make its way inside, and then it's gonna become an osteocyte, okay? So basically, once it's an osteocyte, it means that it's a cell that is lying within a fully formed bone, okay? It's already fully formed bone. And then osteocytes, they occupy a small chamber. Osteocytes are found in a small chamber called a lacuna, all right? And then, basically it's found in this calcified matrix of bone, okay? It's already, that's how the bone is made. It starts being an osteoblast first, and then it makes its way to the inside, and then it becomes more calcified and becomes part of the matrix, and osteoblasts turn into osteocytes. And then whenever they do turn into osteocytes, they're gonna be surrounded by a lacuna. And osteocytes, they look different than osteoblasts, right? Osteocytes, do you see like they have these legs all around it, right? Like spider legs, or I don't know, any insect legs, right? These are called canaliculi, Okay, these legs are called canaliculi, and then we're gonna see and talk about it a lot in the next couple of slides. Okay, but osteocytes are derived from what? Osteocytes are derived from osteoblasts. Okay, good, good, good. And then, like we said, osteoblasts are bone-forming cells, and then they're very important. So we got a little bit of an idea about what is an osteoblast and what is an osteocyte, right? Now let's talk about this one here, which is called an osteoclast. Okay, so osteoclast, everyone, is so we are gonna need a person who's responsible for, let's say, if we have aging bones, to get rid of those, right? So basically, to break down and assimilate old bones so that it gives space and a chance for new bones to be formed and to grow, right? So that person is going to be the osteoclast. It's osteoclast's job to break down and assimilate old bones in the cycle of making new bones and growing new bones, okay? And then this next slide, it does a really good job in showing us how osteoblasts become osteocytes and how they build the bone matrix, and then eventually we end up having the bone, okay? Because whenever we see a bone, we don't imagine the bone as just bunch of cells, right? We just see it as a piece of bone, right? But just like any other structure, bones are also made up of cells. So everyone, what you're seeing here in this image is, here we have collagen fibers, right? So here we have osteogenic cells. Osteogenic cells, whenever there's the term genic cells, it means that these are cells that are destined to be a specific type of a cell. Okay, osteogenic cells, osteon, then osteogenic cells are destined to be what type of cells? Bone cells, okay? So here we can see that these osteogenic cells, look, they're gonna differentiate and start becoming osteoblasts. These are osteoblasts, these are osteogenic cells, and then we're gonna see that these osteogenic cells, they're going to differentiate and become what? Osteoblasts, okay? Like from here, they're gonna become this. So, and then here you can see, here we have the bone matrix, so it's making its way inside. So these osteoblasts, okay, look, they're going to start, osteoblasts, they're gonna deposit bone until they are trapped and they become osteocytes. So look, osteocytes becoming surrounded by bone matrix. So you can see here that these osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, are making their way inside the bone matrix, and then eventually, once they make their way all the way in, they're gonna become osteocytes and they're gonna become part of the cell. But you can see here they're making their way inside, they're being surrounded by the bone matrix, right? And then eventually, they're gonna make their way all the way inside. And then here we can see we have the bone extracellular matrix. And then do you see here in the middle, like one here, one here, one here, one here? What are these? Osteocytes, right? These osteogenic cells became osteoblasts. They made their way and then all the way inside the matrix, and now they are osteocytes. And then osteocytes are going to be surrounded with a lacuna, and then they have these legs that we call them canaliculi, which is not on this slide, but we'll see it soon. Okay, and the osteocytes are the ones that maintain the bone extracellular matrix. Okay, so this is how osteoblasts, they become osteocytes. And then obviously we have osteoclasts, which is not showing in this slide. And then, like we said, osteoclasts, their job is to simulate and break down any older bones to make room and space for new bones to grow. Okay, because just like any other cells, bone cells are also like, yes, they divide, but they're meant to die, right? You don't want any of your cells to keep dividing abnormally, because then that turns into cancer, okay? And then bone cancer is actually a thing as well. So everyone, here we can see the structure of compact bone, okay? We have two types of bone. One is compact bone and the other one is spongy bone, right? So here in this image, and then by the way, in the next couple of slides, I'm going to magnify each section of this image. But I want you to see here that what we're seeing here, this section is literally a small section of the diaphysis. Do we see that? Okay, it's a small section of the diaphysis. I've magnified it, and then in the diaphysis, remember the outside layer is the periosteum, and then inside we have the compact bone on both sides, and then inside we have the endosteum, right? So I'm gonna magnify this tiny section, and then look what it looks like, everyone. So remember the outer layer is the periosteum. You remember the periosteum? Right? That's the outer layer. And then, of course, underneath it, because it's a connective tissue, we're gonna see we have fibers. Do you see the fiber? Right? And then also, these endings are the parts where we're gonna see osteoblasts, and then osteoblasts are gonna make their way inside and then become osteocytes and become part of the compact bone. Okay? Osteocytes, everyone, osteocytes, they look like, I don't know, let's pretend these osteocytes, they look like spiders with legs, okay? So that whenever we see it, we can recognize them, okay? So we're gonna see in these fibers or outside around it, we're gonna see some osteoblasts. But if you look at all here in the middle, do you see these dots everywhere, right? If I magnify it, you'll see it better. Do you see those? Each one is an osteocyte, and then do you see the legs? Those are the canaliculi, right? And then again, we can see here as well, like with these circles, right? And then all here, all of these are what? Osteocytes, okay? And then, yeah, so this is the periosteum, that outside layer. And then inside we have the compact bone, and then we have the endosteum. And we have a little bit of a spongy bone, which we're gonna talk about it soon. Everyone, the spongy bone, the way that I see it is, I don't know if you've noticed, like in cartoons, the way that they have the cheese, it like not, it doesn't look like real cheese, but like the cartoon cheese, with these lines and all that. That's what I resemble a spongy bone to. Okay, so we have a little bit of spongy bone here in the middle. And what I want to focus on here is, because osteocytes, bone cells are cells, cells need nutrients. Do you see all these canals here, right, with arteries and veins, right, bringing in nutrients to the cells, right, because it's another cell and it needs nutrients. And then another thing that I want us to pay attention to here is, what are these things sticking out here? What are those called? Osteons, right? And then these are out just so that we can see it, but they usually look like this, okay? They're just a part of it. So everyone, if we magnify it, we can see an osteon here. And then here you can see an osteon here. And then do you see an osteon is made up of rings, like one ring, two ring, three rings, right? If I magnify it, we'll be able to see it better. So these rings that we're seeing, okay, another term for rings, it's called lamella. What are they? Lamella, okay? And then so each osteon is gonna have many lamella, and then the lamella around the osteon is called interstitial lamella. Okay, do you see this rings around an osteon, right? I mean, of course, we see osteocytes as well, but it's called what? Interstitial lamella. Also, I don't know if you can see it clearly. Do you see there's also rings, but the ring is all around the bone. It's not just around the osteon. Do you see the one in the back, right? And then that's called circumferential lamella. And then that term comes from the circumference of a circle, right? Circumference. So that's a circumferential lamella. And then the lamella around each osteon is an interstitial lamella. Okay? And then each one is an osteon. And then let's keep talking about the osteon, everyone. So it's made up of collagen fibers. And then what are these spiders with the legs here? What are those? Osteocytes. And then again, osteocytes are going to be surrounded with lacuna. And then the legs are called canaliculi. Okay, what are the spider legs called, or osteocyte legs called? Canaliculi, right? And then the rings are called lamella. And then each osteon is going to have its own central canal where we're going to see veins, arteries, and nerves. Okay. We have different types of canals. We have central canal, which is right in the middle of the osteon. And we also have perforating canals. For example, these on the sides are perforating canals. And then these, if they lead to an osteon, like these straight ones, then they are central canal. Okay. And then maybe we can see those here. Look, these are central canals. This is a central canal. And then in between, we have perforating canals of blood vessels and nerves. So coming back here, everyone, we're good with the circumferential lamella, interstitial lamella. This is a compact bone with osteocytes and perforating canals. We have a spongy bone. Here we have perforating canals. These are the osteocytes. Here around it, it's called the outside layer, which is the periosteum. And then we have this inner layer with fibers, and then they contain osteoblasts because these osteoblasts are going to make their way inside and become osteocytes. Good, good, good. And then everyone, this picture is literally just a real bone image under transfer electron microscope. The other ones that we're learning, these are just diagrams, drawing, but really the bone looks like this, okay? And then this is an osteon. This middle part is the central canal. Like this central canal that we're seeing here, this is the central canal. And then these circles that we see around it, these are the lamella. We have circumferential and interstitial lamella. And then do you see these dark dots? Right? These are the osteocytes covered with a lacuna, and then the legs are called canaliculi. All right, so this is the compact bone, spongy bone, the lamella, the osteons, the canals, the central canal, and then this is an actual osteon. Next, what do we see here? What type of a bone structure? Spongy bone structure, and then this is the one that I said it looks like a cartoon cheese, right? And then we have this portion, we've magnified it from the epiphysis of a bone, all right? And then from an epiphysis of a bone, and then we can see how it has a trabeculi, okay? It has trabeculi. And then everyone, if we get like a piece of trabeculi and then we magnify it, look, we're gonna see what are these cells all around it that starts from the sides, osteoblasts, right? And then these osteoblasts are going to develop and they make their way to the middle and become what? Osteocytes, right? And then these are the osteocytes. They're surrounded with lacuna, and the legs are called canaliculi, okay? And we can talk more about this. Let me magnify it. So this is the trabeculi, and then if I get a piece of it and magnify it, this is one trabecula, part of the spongy bone. So these are the osteoblasts. Derived from the osteoblasts, we have the osteocytes covered with lacuna, and then the legs are called canaliculi, right? And then what is this called here? Osteoclast, right? Because we've been talking about osteoblast and osteocyte. We forgot about the osteoclast. The osteoclasts are also cells, right? And then osteoclasts were the ones that were responsible for assimilation and breakdown of older bones, okay? And everyone, that's for compact and spongy bone. Here we can see in the metaphysis, the epiphyseal plate. And then this is what I was telling you. This epiphyseal plate is a thin cartilaginous line. And then it's located like between the epiphysis and the diaphysis region, which is called metaphysis. And then basically this cartilage allows growth of bones, okay? It allows the bone to grow. And then hence this epiphyseal plate is only found in spongy bones, okay? Because if we have a compact bone, does it mean that bone is growing? No, right? I mean, we'll make new cells, right? But it doesn't mean it's growing, right? We're replacing the older cells. So only the growing bones are the ones that have this epiphyseal plate. And then whenever this epiphyseal plate turns into epiphyseal line, Okay, that's an indication that that bone has stopped growing. Okay, and then usually that happens when we hit adulthood. Okay, yeah. Any questions? All right, so next we're gonna start the exoskeleton. And then what we're gonna see in the first two slides, this is literally just a review of the bones that we had to learn for Bio 5, and then which is which is good, you know, we do cover it in anatomy again, but we're gonna go a little bit more in details, okay, in anatomy. So what do we call this bone here? The skull, and then this column here is the vertebral column. These are the rib cages, right? And then what is this upper arm bone called? Humerus, right? And then what do we have here? The radius and the ulna, right? And then everyone, here's how I want you to remember between the radius and the ulna, because I don't know about you, but I don't know, like it used to be confusing for me. And then the way that I always think of which side is the radius, which side is the ulna, is as you can see, this picture, the image that we're seeing here, this is in anatomical position, right? The model is standing straight, and then we have to remember what is the anatomical position like. And we have to remember that, oh, the palms have to be open, right? And then the hands on the side, right? Like this. And then the way that I remember it is if we're standing like this, right? Our thumb, okay, it's gonna be the part that it's sticking out. Do you see that? The thumb is the side that's gonna be sticking out, right? Always that side is gonna be the side with the radius. Okay, so whatever you have, the side that you have the thumb, okay, that side you're gonna have the radius, and then inside is going to be your ulna, okay? Ulna is gonna be the side of your pinky, the radius is going to be where you have your uh, radius, okay? But I don't think of the ulna, I just think of the radius, anatomical position, thumbs out, that's the radius, and then the other one's gonna be the ulna, obviously, right? And then what do we have here? The wrist bone is called the carpal, metacarpal phalanges, right? Actually, carpal is this whole part is the carpal, and then it's made up of many bones here. Like we have many, many bones here together that make the carpal. And then here, this is our metacarpals, and then the top part of our fingers are called the phalanges. And then we're gonna see it more closely shortly. And then pectoral girdle, everyone, it's that area where we have our shoulder, you know, our scapula, our shoulder blade, right? So here we have our clavicle. What's the clavicle? The collarbone, right? The clavicle. We said that the clavicle is connected to the sternum, and then it goes to the back and it's connected to the shoulder or the scapula, right? We're gonna cover that. The scapula is our shoulder blade, right? The shoulder blades are the scapula. And then we have in the thoracic cage, we said we have the sternum and the ribs. And just like up here, we called it the pectoral girdle. Here we have the pelvic girdle. And then we'll talk about that, why we call these pectoral girdle and pelvic girdle. So everyone here, whatever you have, our vertebral column, then we have here the sacrum, and then we have the butt bone, which is called the coccyx, right? And then what are those on the sides? Which bones are those? Pelvic bones, right? And then we're going to talk about the pelvic bones, and then we're going to talk about how this pelvic bones, it looks different in the male anatomy versus the female anatomy. Okay, like there's a lot of differences in the pelvic bones between male anatomy and female anatomy. And then going lower than that, what is this leg bone called? Femur. The knee is the patella. And then what do we have here? The tibia and fibula. Okay, tibia and fibula might be confusing, like the radius and the ulna. Again, the way that I remember this is, you know how we said whatever we have the thumb in anatomical position is the side of the radius. So I just remember the tibia as the side where I have my big toes, right? So that's gonna be the tibia, and then the fibula is gonna be the outside, okay? So tibia is like medial, right? Closer to the midline of the body. And then the fibula is lateral, okay? So just think of radius, the thumb, and then the tibia, the side of the big toe, okay? And this is the big toe, this is the big toe, this is the tibia, and then the outside is gonna be the fibula, okay? Um, Also, you can think of it this way. If you think of your like thumb or your big toe, those fingers are the ones that are thicker than your other fingers, right? And then if you look at your radius and your tibia, those bones are thicker than your ulna or your radius, right? Sorry, ulna or your fibula, right? So you can think of it that way as well. And then what do we call the ankles? Tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges. And then here, this is the back. Again, the back of the skull, vertebral column, our clavicle, scapula, humerus, radius, ulna. You can see the sacrum from the back, the pelvic bone, femur, the tibia, fibula, tarsal, metatarsal, phalanges. Now, everything that we covered so far, that was like just a general review from Bio 5 Bones, right? Now we're gonna, instead of saying the skull, now we're gonna talk about the bones on the skull and the facial bones on the face, which is 22 bones, okay? But it's not too bad because some of those are the same name and then it's simply left and right, okay? So if you focus with me and participate, I wanna make sure that all of you are learning all the bones as we go along, okay? So everyone, here we have the, let's start with the cranial bones. Cranial bones are the bones of the skull. And then what is this bone here where we have our forehead? Frontal bone. And then right behind the frontal bone, we have the left and right parietal bone. What do we have? Left and right parietal bone. And then if you go all the way to the back, which we can barely see it here, that's gonna be the occipital bone, which is, that one is kind of familiar to us, right? And then what about on the sides? We're gonna have left and right temporal bone, okay? So everyone, this one was the frontal, then we have left and right, parietal, then we have left and right, temporal, all the way in the back, we have the occipital, okay? And then what about the cheekbones here? We have left and right cheekbones. What are these called? Zygomatic bones. What do we call the chin bone here? Mandible, right? And then mandible is kind of familiar to us because we have a salivary gland there, submandibular salivary gland, right? Out of the three salivary glands that we have. And then this upper lip part, that bone is called the maxilla. Good, good, good. And then you know here, the bone that separates our left and right nasal openings, like right here, right? That one is going to be called the vomer bone, okay? Vomer bone. So what's the name of the bone that separates our left and right nasal openings? Vomer bone. And then we have something easy here. This part is called the nasal bone, okay? So these are good. I'm gonna add a couple of more. Do you see this purple one? It's like you can see part of this purple from the eye orbits, like the openings, and you can see it all the way out here. It's like a mask, right? Like an eye mask, right? That one, everyone, is called the sphenoid bone. And then the sphenoid bone, if we like detach it from the other bones and look at the sphenoid bone itself, the sphenoid bone, it looks like, for me, it resembles a bat, okay, like with the body and the wing, and it has a greater wing and then it has a lesser wing. Like it has a big wing and then it has a smaller wing, and then that's what we call the parts of the sphenoid bone. This is something that's coming up. Don't worry yet, but that's gonna be the one that, it looks like a bat with a greater wing and a lesser wing, and it's also gonna have the body, right? And then we call that sella turcica, okay? That's just something coming up, but that's gonna be which bone? Sphenoid bone, okay? And then this green one that we're seeing, it's hidden in the back. That bone, everyone, it's found behind the nasal part, in the nasal cavity where we have our sinuses in that area, okay? That bone is called the ethmoid bone. Okay, so these are new bones or not popular bones that we see a lot in Bio 5. So this one that looks like a mask, it's called the sphenoid bone, right? And then that's the one that we said it's gonna have what, greater wing and lesser wing, right? And then we have the ethmoid bone, which is hidden behind here, okay? And then another one, this right here, this bone here, it's called the lacrimal bone. And then the way that you can remember lacrimal bone, and that's how I remember it, is right here in our eyes, we have a gland. And then don't worry about knowing this gland, okay? I'm just giving you this information so that we can remember the lacrimal bone, okay? I'm not gonna ask you about it. We have a gland called lacrimal gland, and then the job of this gland is to produce tears, okay? So, and then where do we produce the tears from? From here, right? So that's where we have the lacrimal bone, okay? So just remember it that way. And then the only one left is you can barely see a dot of red here. I'm trying not to put the laser pointer because it's the same color. And then that's called the palatine bone. And then with different views, we're gonna see a better view of the palatine bone, okay? But let's review everything and make sure that we're learning these bones. So what do we call the forehead bone? Frontal bone. Behind it, we're gonna have the left and right. Parietal bone. On the sides, we're gonna have left and right. Temporal bone. All the way in the back, we're gonna have the occipital bone. And then the cheekbones are gonna be left and right. Zygomatic bone. And then the chin is gonna be the mandible. And then upper lip. And this part is gonna be the maxilla. The opening of left and right nasal opening is going to be the bone that divides the left and right nasal opening is called the vomer bone. And then here, what we have, the nose bone is called the nasal bone. And then, by the way, right where we have the nasal bone, that's also where we have our septum. Okay, like if someone like breaks their nose here, it's the septum that's get broken. Okay, and then we'll see that in a different slide. And then what do we call the bone that it looks like a mask? And I said it also looks like a bat. It has a greater wing and a lesser wing, the sphenoid bone. And then what did we call the bone that it's hidden behind the nasal part? Ethmoid bone. And then what about the one that is where we have our tears, lacrimal bone, and we have the palatine bone, okay? All right, are we feeling good about those? Yes, okay, good, good, good. This slide is not that important. Let me just introduce it to you. Cranial cavities, where we have our brains, right? This is just showing us the skeleton, right? Here we have the orbits where the eye is located. And then do you see here the area where we have our sinuses, right? The nasal area. This bone in the middle, do you see that? It looks like a butterfly, okay? I'm gonna say butterfly and bat a lot today. That's the ethmoid bone. All right, that is the ethmoid bone. This middle part is the crista galli. And then don't worry, we're gonna get there and we'll talk about it. So this is the nasal cavity. And then anything pertaining to the mouth is gonna be located in the oral cavity. So let's review the ones that we learned so far. This is an anterior view. So the forehead bone is gonna be the frontal bone, and then little bit to the back, we have left and right parietal bone, and then on the sides, we have left and right temporal bones. All the way in the back that we can't see in this image is the occipital bone. And then this part here is going to be the mandible, and then upper lip, and this area is going to be the maxilla, the bone that divides the left and right nasal openings is the vomer bone. And then here we have the nasal bone. The mask, remember we said that we can see it through the orbits of the eye, and then it goes all the way on the side. This is the sphenoid bone behind the nasal, like in the nasal area in green, we have the ethmoid bone, right? We can't see it clearly. We have a little bit of the lacrimal bone here and the palatine bone here, okay? So everyone, how do we feel about those so far? Good? Okay, can you do the same on this one? I think we can, right? even though it's not colored. But in our fields, real humans come like this and not like this, right? And then even though actually, the obvious ones I would use like the cadaver, but I have used like not cadaver images. But for example, whenever we used to do the lab exams in person, I used to use like an actual skeleton like this, and we had to label like the actual skeleton in this color, right? The previous images are making it easier because they're divided by colors, okay? So, but let's get comfortable with the actual cadaver because in our fields, this is how it actually looks like. All right. And then everyone, now we're going to review everything that we've been saying so far. And then I'm going to add just a couple of things, okay? So what was the forehead bone? And then little bit in the back, we have left and right. And then on the sides, left and right temporal, all the way in the back, occipital. This one is the mandible. Here we have the maxilla, the cheekbone, zygomatic. We can see a little bit of the nose bone, which is the nasal bone, little bit of the lacrimal and the ethmoid. And then this part, like part of the mask, is the sphenoid bone, okay? And then we feel really good about those, right? So I'm gonna add a couple of more things here. The first thing I wanna add is sutures. What are sutures? So you see how we have the frontal bone and the parietal bone. In between, we have a suture that connects these bones together, okay? Basically, that's how the skull is fully formed, okay? Because like when babies are born, they say, oh, be careful with the head because their skull is not fully formed because, for example, the frontal and the parietal, they haven't come together and the suture has not fully developed, right? It's still a spongy bone. It's still soft. It's not hard. It's not calcified where it doesn't move anymore, right? Just like we have it now. So we're going to learn a couple of sutures between the frontal and the parietal and the temporal, parietal and the occipital. Okay, and then it's not a lot. It's not too bad. There's three here, and then the fourth one is in an upcoming slide, but they're not hard, okay? So first, what do we call the suture between the frontal bone and the parietal bone? Coronal suture, okay? This suture here is called the coronal suture. Coronal suture, it connects the frontal bone to the parietal bone. Next, let's do the suture that connects the parietal bone to the temporal bone. It's going to be called the squamous suture. What is it called? Squamous suture. And then the next one is parietal and the occipital suture here. It's going to be the lambdoid suture. What is it called? Lambdoid suture. Okay. So let's review these three again, and I'm going to add one more, but that's super easy. Or let me add one more and we'll do all over again. So the parietal, we have left and right parietal bone. And then, so which is like right in the middle. What do we call a section where we cut it right in the middle? Sagittal. So that suture is called sagittal suture. Easy? Okay, so we learned four so far, okay? And then that's all, that's it. I'm not gonna add more. So between the frontal and parietal is called the coronal suture. Between left and right parietal is called the sagittal suture. And then between parietal and temporal, it's called the squamous. Between parietal and occipital, it's called the lambdoid suture. Okay? How are we feeling about the sutures? Good? So what were they? This is the coronal, squamous, lambdoid, and between the parietals, sagittal. Okay? All right. So I'm going to add a couple of more things. Okay? Like we're going to cover these now and some here. I mean, we already know the occipital bone, and then we're going to cover some here. Okay? So the first one I want to cover here is the external acoustic meatus. So everyone, acoustic means it pertains to the acoustic means hearing, right? External acoustic meatus here. And then the other terms that we're gonna learn here, a lot of them has the term process in the part of the name. like mastoid process, styloid process, and then one of those here, the last one, it says coronoid process. Okay, so the term process has a meaning. That's why we're seeing it there. Okay, it has in anatomy. Process means that it refers to a projection or outgrowth of a tissue, like an extension of a bone. So whenever you see something sticking out, it's probably going to have the term process there. Okay. For example, this one here, do you see this part sticking out from the temporal bone? Do you see that? That's called the mastoid process. What is it called? Mastoid process. And then there's this thing hanging like AirPods. Do you see that? The AirPods here. That's called styloid process. It's sticking out and then it's like from the acoustic, from the ear area. That's why I'm gonna call it AirPods, right? What are they called? Styloid process, okay? So this part sticking out is the mastoid process. That side, that part is the styloid process. And then what was this one? The external acoustic meatus, okay? And then speaking of process, I wanna cover this one too here. And then remember, process means like it's the part that is outgrown, sticking out, right? And then this part is going to be the coronoid process. What do we call this? Coronoid process, okay? And then the rest of these three names that we have to cover, because they are all on this bone here. What is this bone called? Mandible. Because they're all found on this bone here, right? They're all going to be mandibular, 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 and then whatever they are. And then the terms here, everyone, condyle, notch, or ramus, they have a meaning. And then we're going to see notch, condyles, ramus, other places of other bones, okay? So what do those mean? For example, mandibular condyle, this is the mandibular condyle, okay? And then usually condyle is this rounded projection at the end of the bone, and then that forms part of a joint, okay? For example, here, do you see like this is our chin, right? When we open it and close it, right? And then it is part of a joint, right? And then it's called condyle. For example, whenever we learn about, we keep saying humerus is connected to the radius and the ulna, and then like there's a lot going on there where the humerus and the radius and the ulna are connected together, okay? And then this part here, right? We have condyles, we have epicondyles, we have this rounded projection, and then we have these joints here, and then we can do these movements here. It's because of these condyles, right? And then, by the way, the bones are not hard. The hard part is the part where we have like the humerus where it's connected to the ulna and the radius, and then ulnar radius connected to the carpals, or even the femur connected to the tibia and the fibula, and the tibia and fibula connected to the tarsals, okay? I think that's the hardest it gets, but we can get through it, okay? Like if we learn some of the terms, like for example, we're gonna see a lot of condyles or epicondyles, which is this rounded projection where we can find in joints. If we remember that, and then I'm asking multiple choice questions on the exam, so I think we can make sense and be able to label them. Okay, so let's keep going over them. So this is going to be called the mandibular condyle. Okay, like we said, condyle is this rounded projection at the end of a bone that is part of a joint. All right, and then so we covered condyle. Next, we have mandibular notch. Notch is, do you see here this V shape, this indentation or this depression of bone that we have here, right? And then it also helps with the joint with other structures, right? And then that's gonna be a notch, and then we're gonna see notch other places, okay? And then here, this surface here, it's called a ramus. So this area here, just this area on the mandible, it's called a ramus. Ramus is just like a branch or part of a bone that's there. So that's the mandibular ramus, okay? So everyone, what is this called here? Mandibular condyle. And then here, mandibular notch. And then, oh, this area here is mandibular ramus. And then this one is the coronoid process because it's sticking out. And then speaking of things that are sticking out, what is this called? Mastoid process. And then the ear pods are called the styloid process. And then this is going to be the external acoustic meatus, okay? Something special about the stylus process, everyone, that bone that is sticking out, from that bone, there's a muscle, and then from that muscle, it's going to be connected to a bone in the neck, and then we only have one bone in the neck, that's it, and then that's called the hyoid bone, and then we're going to see it down the slides. We're going to get there, but in the neck, we only have one bone. It's called the hyoid bone, and then that hyoid bone is connected to these to the styloid process here, okay, with a muscle. There's a muscle that connects the styloid process to the hyoid bone. So we'll see it when we get there, okay? So everyone, how are we feeling about the cranial bones, facial bones, the sutures, and some of those process and mandibular parts of the bones that we covered? Good. Okay, try to make yourself in class as familiar as you can as possible so that you just have to go and repeat yourself and study. Okay, but be super familiar. Like by the time you go home from today's lab, make sure that you know how to think about each structure and how you're going to remember it. Okay. All right, and then this is the same one. Everyone, you can see here, what is this here? External acoustic meatus. This is the mastoid process, the ear pods, styloid process. Here we have the mandibular condyle, mandibular notch, and then mandibular ramus. And then what process is that? Coronoid process, okay? And then for the sutures, what do we call the one between parietal and frontal? And then between the two parietals, sagittal. Between the temporal and the parietal, squamous. Between parietal and the occipital, lamboid. Okay, good. And then the rest were okay, right? The facial bones. And then everyone, good job, because this is the same image but a posterior view. And then here we're adding the sagittal suture. So what do we call the suture between left and right parietal bones? Sagittal. Between the parietal and the occipital, lamboid. Between temporal and parietal, squamous, okay? And then everyone, do you remember I said like the anatomical term for an opening, like a hole or an opening, it's called a foramen, right? So do you see here, like if you hold any skull and then you turn it, do you see that opening here? There's a hole in the skull. That's called the foramen magnum. What is it called? Foramen magnum, okay? And then what is this bone here? The mandible, okay? How are you feeling about this? Good, good, okay, good. And then this is another view. This is a superior view. So what is this bone here? And then left and right, parietal, this is the corneal suture. This is sagittal, this suture, lamboid, the bone, occipital bone, right? Good. Okay, everyone, this one, it's not good view for other bones, but it's a really good view for the sphenoid bone, which I said we're gonna talk about it, okay? So everyone, this one, it's an inferior view, so we're holding the skull and looking at it from the bottom. And here we can see that, what is this bone here in the back, lower back? Occipital, and then we have left and right temporal, right? And then here we're gonna see that, do you see this bone here that looks like I said, it's gonna look like a bat with, not this one, this is the vomer bone, okay? But here, this one here, do you see you have a lesser wing and then a greater wing, right? And then probably in other images, we might see it even clearer because here they don't even have the labels for it. Okay, but this is gonna be the sphenoid bone. All right, everyone? And then the palatine bone that we kept seeing like just a dot of red, this here we can see the palatine bone more clearly. And then everything is like the maxilla, the zygomatic bone, And then here we can see a little bit of the parietal on the side. That's the occipital from this view. This view, it's the internal anatomy. This is a mid-sagittal section. We can see the frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. And then here we have the sphenoid bone. And then we know that the sphenoid bone is here, but it's mid-sagittal. So we don't see the lesser wing, the greater wing, or we don't see it even look like a mass because this is a mid-sagittal view, right? And but whenever we see a good view, I just want you to know that the sphenoid bone has a what? Greater wing and a lesser wing. And then the body is going to be called the sella turcica. What is it going to be called? Sella turcica. And then when we see a really good photo, I will show it to you, okay? And then what bone we said we have like behind the nose area? Ethmoid bone, okay? So this is going to be the ethmoid bone that we can see here. That's the vomer that separates the left and right nasal openings, little bit of the maxilla, the mandible, little bit of the palatine, and then we are familiar with the rest. This is the same one, but as a cadaver, it does get a bit challenging, right? Here versus here, right? Like, look at the sphenoid bone. It's hard to locate the sphenoid bone when we don't have the colors and stuff like that. This is the ethmoid bone, the nasal bone, maxilla, mandible, right? And then frontal bone, parietal bone. Look. All right, this is a superior view, internal structure of the skull. Everyone, this slide is a really good slide to label the sphenoid bone and the ethmoid bone, okay? Do you see the sphenoid bone, the bat? Do you see this is the small one? And then this is the bigger one, the bigger wing, right? And then do you see inside there's like a tinier bat with a lesser wing? Do you see that? Right? This is the lesser, and then this is the greater, right? And then the body is called the, yes, sella turcica, okay? So we have the lesser wing, we have the greater wing, and then we have the sella turcica. And then up here, we have the ethmoid bone, everyone. And then this middle part of the ethmoid bone right here, it's called the crista galli. What is it called? Crista galli. And then on the sides of the crista galli, it's called the cerebriform plate. What is it called? Cerebriform plate, okay? All right. So this is a good slide to study the sphenoid bone and the ethmoid bone, okay? The rest we are familiar with, the temporal bone, occipital bone, parietal bone. What is this opening here? Foramen magnum. And then this is the same slide, and then but a cadaver. And then when we used to do it in person, everyone, I used to ask like, get a skull and then put an arrow here where we have the crista galli of the ethmoid bone. And I used to ask that. Okay, and we have a lot of skulls here in the back. If you want to, like, whenever you want, just go grab one and then just check it out. It's in that cabinet. And then so the ethmoid bone is going to have what? The middle part is the crista galli, and then the sides are the cerebriform plate, okay? And then here, what do we see here? The sphenoid bone, this whole thing is the sphenoid bone. This is the lesser wing, and then this is the greater wing. And then in the middle, it's called the sella turcica. And then here, all the way in the middle, it's called the foramen magnum. All right, this is also a really good slide because it has all the bones, but they're detached and then they're colored so we can tell which one is which. This is the frontal bone, and then we have left and right, parietal bone all the way in the back, and then left and right, the cheekbone, the chin, maxilla, and then we don't see the vomer bone here, but this nasal one is the nasal bone. This green one behind the nose, ethmoid bone. Ethmoid bone has what? Crista, galli, and cerebriform plate. Good. And then this purple one is the sphenoid bone. The sphenoid bone has a greater wing, lesser wing, sella turcica. Wow, okay, yeah, that's it. And then this is showing us the orbit. The orbit is like the opening where the eyeball is located and the eye muscles are located. And then here we can see we have the sphenoid bone. This is part of the frontal bone. We can see a little bit of the parietal, temporal. This is continuation of the sphenoid bone because it's like a mask. It goes all the way there on both sides. The cheekbone is the zygomatic bone. Here we have the maxilla. This red dot is the palatine bone. All the way here inside the eye is the lacrimal bone, and behind the nose here we have the ethmoid bone, okay? And then this one, it has the bones that we learned, but it's a different section, so don't worry about this one. And then this is showing us the nasal cavity, everyone. So this is the bony nasal septum, right? And then this is going to be the vomer bone that it divides between the left and right openings of the nose, okay? All right. And then do you remember I said in the neck we have one bone just by itself, right? What is that bone called? Hyoid bone, okay? And then do you see the styloid process coming out of the external acoustic meatus? And then do you see this muscle, right? And then what do we have here? We have a bone, it's called the hyoid bone, okay? And then underneath it, we have the trachea and the larynx, okay? So what is the neck bone called? Hyoid bone. The neck bone is, it's built up, this is how it's built. It has the body, it has two horns, it has the lesser horn, and it has the greater horn, okay? Any questions? Like from the head till the neck, we're good? All right. Next, we're gonna cover the vertebral column. This one, it is a lot of bones, but it's very, very easy, okay? And I'm gonna make it easier, and then hopefully we can learn everything right here, right now. So everyone, let's learn the bones of the vertebral column. So the vertebral column is made up of vertebra, okay? So just bunch of vertebra, they're stacked on top of each other, and they make our vertebral column. And what do we have inside of the vertebral column? What does the vertebral column protect? What does it have? The spinal cord, okay, which is part of the central nervous system. And the names of the vertebral column, the vertebra, each bone has a name, but the names are very easy because the vertebra are divided into three sections. So what do we call the section that pertains to the neck area? Cervical. What do we call the section that pertains to the chest area? What do we call the section that it pertains to the lower back area? Lumbar, right? And okay, that's good. And then now let's see how many cervical vertebra do we have, how many thoracic vertebra do we have, and how many lumbar vertebra do we have. And then we're gonna name them with their, you know, C1, C2, that way. Who has watched the lecture and remembers what I say in the lecture about this? Yes, yes. Who else? Who else from there? All right. So in the lecture, please watch the lecture. Please watch the lecture. So, I mean, I'm going to say it again in the lab. So if you remember this thing where breakfast is at 7, by the way, everything is early. It's early breakfast, early dinner, okay? Breakfast is at 7. Lunch is at noon. It's on time. And then dinner is at 5, okay? Then you'll be able to remember that the cervical vertebra, they go up to 7. C1 to C7 are the cervical vertebra. And then we said lunch is at 12. So the thoracic vertebra, they're going to go from T1 till T12. And then we said that early dinner is at 5. So the lumbar vertebra, it's going to go from L1 to L5, okay? So this is how we label the vertebrae. It's very easy, everyone. The cervical goes from C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7. The T's go from T1, T2, all the way till T12 in that order. And then we have L1, L2, L3, L4, and L5. Okay? And then after that, we have the sacrum. And then we have the butt bone, which is called the coccyx. Okay? And then this is literally the names. The only thing is C1 and C2, okay, they look a little bit different, and their name is C1 and C2, but they also have a special name, uh, Atlas and the Axis. But other than that, all the rest, they have a similar structure, and then the names are literally just cervical vertebra 1, like C1, C2, C3. And then you might be familiar, like when someone's talking about, I don't know, back pain or a disc pain. And then usually it's like in the L1s to L5s because it's the lower back, right? The lumbar region, right? So we're going to talk about this. And then one thing that I want you to pay attention to, everyone, is that as you can see, obviously, if you look at the vertebra and compare the C's to the T's and to the L's, which ones are going to be bigger? Which ones are carrying heavier weight? The lumbar, right? Because the cervical is literally responsible here for the head, right? And then thoracic is like this upper body, and then the lumbar is like most of our upper body is all of that weight is on the lumbar, right? Vertebra to hold us. And we're gonna see that as we go lower, right? This part of the vertebra, which we call it the body, right? It's gonna get what? Bigger and bigger, okay? And then do you see what we have in between each vertebra? We have the intervertebral discs, right? Those cartilages that we said, like, they're made up of cartilaginous tissues. They're very important because we don't want anything happening to those cartilages, because then the vertebra are gonna sit on top of each other and then cause pain, okay? So everyone, this is the cervical C1 to C7, thoracic T1 to T12, lumbar L1 to L5, and then we have the sacrum and the coccyx, and then this is what it looks like on a lateral view of a human body. Okay, so now let's learn a typical vertebra, what it looks like. So obviously there are going to be some differences between the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebra, but they're also going to have some similarities, okay? Some of the differences is, for example, we talked about it, the body, right? The more we go from cervical, thoracic to lumbar, this body here, it's going to get what? Thicker and bigger, right? Because it's carrying heavier weight. Something that's different between cervical, thoracic, and lumbar is, do you see this bone sticking out here, right? And then we can feel this bone. If you can feel your back here, like maybe more, you can feel the most in your thoracic area, okay? Not as much in the lumbar, and then not as much in your cervical area, but you can feel the most in your, this part sticking out, you'll feel most in your thoracic area, because in your thoracic area, this bone is like very long and sharp and pointy, okay? And then this bone here, this part of the bone is called the spinous process. What is it called? Spinous process. And this, besides the size of the body, this spinous process, it helps us identify if it's a cervical, thoracic, or lumbar, okay? For example, the thoracic one, this is like so obvious to me, it's a thoracic one because it's like pointy, and then it's like looking inferior, and then it's long, right? And then the book tries to resemble those spinous process to like different animal faces. Okay, I don't know if you can see it here. Can you imagine this as a face of a giraffe? You see it, right? And then, so this is a thoracic. If we go to lumbar, lumbar is gonna be more shorter and thicker. And then you're gonna, that's gonna be resembling the face of a moose, okay? So, and then this bone that we're talking about, what is the name of this bone? Like most importantly, it's the spinous process, okay? So this is gonna be the body, and then this is gonna be the spinous process. All of our bones have a spinous process except for the C1, okay? And then we'll come back to that. But I just wanted to show you the image on the spinous process. Look, do you see the lumbar? Like, can you tell this is a lumbar vertebra? The body is bigger, but do you see the moose face? Yes, okay. So there's a picture here. So this is gonna be the thoracic giraffe, and then this is gonna be the lumbering moose, okay? So what is the name of this bone that's changing? No, this part. The spinous process, okay? That's the one that we can feel it from the back. And then, by the way, another way that we can tell the difference between the two is, so there's the body. Obviously, the body is going to get thicker and bigger. The thoracic one, the thoracic ones, everyone has these parts. I don't know, the ears of the giraffe, has these parts, and which we call it transverse process. Okay, these are spinous process. These are transverse process. uh, all vertebra have a transverse process, but you'll know that the thoracic one is the thoracic one because it has a facet here. And then these facets are facets because it's going to articulate with another bone. Okay, and then for the vertebra, right? For the thoracic vertebra, what did we say it articulates? So not only the thoracic vertebra, they sit on top of each other. What other bone goes to the back and connects to the vertebra? The ribs, okay? So here we have the transverse processes, and then they all have that, but the thoracic ones have these facets. Do you see these blue things? And then it means that it's gonna attach to something else, and then those are gonna be the ribs, okay? So that's another way to know it. But other than that, these facets, the superior and the inferior ones, these are just for so that one vertebra can sit on top of the other vertebra, okay? But the transverse process is for the ribs to be connected to. All right, I'm gonna go back and then, so we were talking about what a typical vertebra looks like. So what are we gonna have here? We're gonna have the body, and then whatever we have this opening, that's the opening where we would find what? The spinal cord, okay? But don't worry about it. We'll talk about that in the nervous system. And then what is this bone here? Spinous process. This is the one that we said we can use it to identify between different types of vertebra. And then what about the sides here? Transverse process. And then transverse process, those are the ones that have a facet that will articulate with the ribs, right? Only the thoracic ones, right? And then only the thoracic ones are the ones that are connected to the ribs, right? And then we have other facets for them to sit on top of each other, right? So everyone, you see here the body, and then in between we have intervertebral discs. This here is the spinal cord. That's where we have the vertebral foramen. Foramen means what? Opening. And then, this is the spinous process, right? And then this is the inferior articular process. And then we have superior articular process. Process is what? It's sticking out, right? And then also it's connected by a joint to something else, right? And then this is a joint here, one vertebra sitting on the other vertebra, okay? So we have superior and inferior process, and then they have facets on it. Facet is this blue thing, and then they sit on each other, okay? So this is an example of a typical vertebra, but this specific example is on thoracic vertebra. So everyone, are we comfortable with this? The body, the spinous process, the transverse process, and then some articular process, which is superior and inferior, so that the vertebra can sit on top of each other. And then this one here, it's a good example of a thoracic vertebra, and then we went over these as well. So let's look at the cervical vertebra, and then everyone, I'm gonna magnify each image one by one. Okay, I just want you to know that like all the cervical vertebra, they look the same except for C1 and C2. Okay, C1 and C2, they look completely different. Like specifically C1 is completely different. It doesn't have a body. It doesn't have a spinous process. Like C1, because it's gonna be the first one all the way at the top, okay? So this is a typical cervical vertebra. This is C5. Does it have a body? Does it have a spinous process? Okay. And then does it have transverse process? Yes. But everyone, do you see the transverse process for the cervical? It looks different than the thoracic. Okay, because do we need facets for the cervical? Is it going to be connected to ribs for the cervical? No, right? But for the thoracic, we have the transverse process, and the cervical is going to also have this foramen, this transverse opening, right? So that's how you can tell that it's cervical from the transverse process. And obviously, the spinous process is going to be very short, right? So this is what a typical cervical vertebra looks like from C3, C4, C5, C6, C7. Okay. Now, image B and C. Image B represents C1. Another name for C1 is atlas. And then picture C, it says C2 represents C2. Another name for C2 is the axis. Okay. Let's look at the atlas. Atlas looks completely different, and none of the vertebra looks like the atlas. And you can immediately tell that that's the one. Okay. Atlas does not have a body. Okay. Does atlas have a body? No. Atlas does not have a spinous process. Does it have a spinous process? No. Okay. And then it does have a transverse process. Yes, transverse process. Yes. And then it just has its facets so that it can articulate with the next bone. Okay. So everyone, this bone is called the atlas C1. Let's look at the C2. C2 also has something that none of the other vertebra has. It's going to be this part here that's sticking out. It's called the dens. What is it called? Dens. And then when we stack them up, C1 and C2 on top of each other, do you see this is C1? Do you see the C2 is like sticking out of C1 here? Do you see the dens, right, of the C2 sticking out? Now, the C2 has a dens on this side, okay? But it has a body on the bottom side, okay? So it doesn't have a full body like all the other cervical vertebra. It has a dens and it has a body here at the bottom, okay? And then does C2 have a spinous process? Yes, and then it also has a transverse process, these two on the sides, right? And then the rest are gonna be C3, C4, C5. They're gonna look like this one here, okay? All right. And then everyone, next here we have, oh, this is just showing the same images here, but magnified. So does this look like a typical C5? Like typical cervical vertebra? It has a body, yes. Spinous process, transverse process, and then facets so that the vertebra can be stacked on top of each other. Which one is this one? C1 or atlas, right? Does it have a body? Does it have a spinous process? Does it have transverse process? Yes, right? And then this one is the C2. Another name for it is the axis. Does the axis have a full body or only body on one side? Also, what does the axis has that the others don't? Dens, right? Does the axis has transverse process? Yes. And then this is all the C's stacked on top of each other, okay? Next, we have the thoracic vertebra. Everyone, these images are very tiny, so I'm gonna magnify them one by one. But the thoracic vertebra is the one that we already saw and we're very familiar to it, okay? So the thoracic vertebra, does it have a body? Yes, and then do you see how the body got bigger in thoracic, right? Does it have a spinous process? Yes, and what does the spinous process looks like for a thoracic vertebra? It's gonna be long, pointy, sharp, correct? And then also, does it have a transverse process? Yes. What did we say about transverse process and the thoracic vertebra? What is it gonna have on it? Facets, right? These are called transverse costal facet. Everyone, the term costal means pertaining to the ribs, okay? Because if you look at those ribs like that we see around us, do you see where you have your ribs and then there's the cartilage and then it's connected to the sternum, right? That's called costal cartilage. It's made up of cartilage tissue. It's a joint because it's joining the ribs to the sternum, right? So whenever you see the term costal, it means that it pertains to the ribs. So what did we say about the thoracic vertebra? It's going to be connected to the ribs in like from the ribs are going to go to the back and be connected to the vertebra, and then from the front it's going to be connected to the sternum, right? So transverse costal facet. And then here we just have other facets like superior articular facet or inferior articular facets, and then these are so that the thoracic vertebra can be stacked up and they sit on top of each other, okay? Like Legos. Not exactly like Legos, but like Legos. So they're gonna like pieces are gonna come together, okay? So are we comfortable with a typical thoracic vertebra like T1 till T12? And then they're all the same, okay? They're not like the cervical, the C1 and C2 are different. They're all the same. Everyone, this is the lateral view. Do you see the body? Yes. Do you see the spinous process? And then the transverse process that has the transverse costal facet, right? And then also here we have, and then also there's other parts of the ribs that gets connected. For example, we have the inferior costal facet. So whenever we see the structure of the ribs, we can imagine how the ribs are going to be connected to the vertebral column, okay? So also, do you see this superior and inferior articular process? That's where basically the vertebrae are going to sit on top of each other. In this slide, we have two articulated thoracic vertebra. They're already sitting on top of each other, right? So this is the top facet, and then this is the top facet here, or the inferior articular process here, so that the vertebra can sit on top of each other. These are the bodies. Between the bodies, what do we have? Intervertebral discs. These intervertebral discs, they are type of a joint. Okay, when we cover the joint shortly, they are type of a joint. I mean, they're not like the joints that we can move, like our the ball and socket joint that we have here, where the humerus is attached to our glenoid cavity of our shoulders. I'm throwing names because we're gonna get there, right? We can't move it as freely as much, right? But these the places that we have cartilages and then it's joining one bone to the other, those are all different types of joints, okay? And then this is called what? Intervertebral discs, okay? And then next we have the lumbar. Again, we saw what a typical lumbar looks like, so let me magnify one by one. Everyone, do you see the body got even bigger, right? Thicker, and then we have the spinous process. It should be like, I don't know, shorter and thicker. And then does the lumbar vertebra have transverse process? Yes. Does it have a facet? No, right? It's not going to be connected to the ribs, and we only have 5 of those, L1 to L5. It has articular process, like these parts sticking out with the facets, and then these are the facets that they're gonna come together, right? Good. And then this is a lateral view. So do you see the big body, right? The spinous process, the moose face. They have the articular facets, superior and inferior process, and the facets where, so that we can stack them on top of each other. And then what is this one here without a facet? The transverse process, okay? And then if we put them on top of each other, this is what it looks like. And then this is how the transverse process is here. It does not have a facet, right? This is showing us the difference between cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebra. For example, the body here, the body has like a small and oval shape, and it's telling us that C1 doesn't have a body. C2, one side has a dens, the other side has a body. For the thoracic, it looks like the heart-shaped, and then for the lumbar, it has a kidney-shaped, right? As you can see here, or a bean shape, all right, the shape of a bean for the body. The vertebral foramen, this opening here, it looks triangular for the cervical, circular for the thoracic, and it looks like again, a triangle for the flat triangle in the lumbar. Transverse process. So cervical, we have transverse process, but the cervical transverse process has foramen, right? Has these openings. The thoracic transverse process, we have it. They don't have opening. Instead, they have a costal facet, right? Because they get connected to the ribs. And then here we have, for the lumbar, we have transverse process, but they're short, and then, but they keep themselves for themselves because they don't get attached to anything, right? And then the spinous process, we talked about it, how it gets long and pointy for the thoracic giraffe and the lumbering moose. Everyone, this is the sacrum and the coccyx. So you go lower than L5, then you reach the sacrum. And then if you go lower, you're going to reach the apex of the sacrum and then the coccyx, which is the butt bone. Here we can see sacral foramen or foramina. What does it mean? The openings of the sacral bone, right? Good, good, good. And then we saw the thoracic giraffe. We saw the lumbering moose. And then this is just showing us that on top of the body, what do we have? We have the intervertebral discs, okay? And then these intervertebral discs are made of collagen, okay? They are an example of a joint. They join the two vertebrae together. And then everyone, again, this slide is also not hard, okay? First, let's cover the parts of the sternum. Okay, the sternum is divided into three parts, okay? We have the top part here is called the manubrium. And then the middle part is going to be called the body. And then the tail is going to be called the xiphoid process, okay? So this tie part where we tie the tie, it's called the manubrium. The middle, the tail, xiphoid process. And then if you look at closely to the manubrium, you're gonna see that it has clavicular notch. So it means that it has a notch. The clavicles are gonna be connected to the sternum, right? And then we talked about that our collarbones here, they're connected to the sternum on one side, and the other side, they're gonna be connected to the shoulders, okay? And then we'll talk about that shortly, okay? And then everyone, do you see in the back the T1 vertebra? And then it goes all the way down till T12. And then we'll start with the L1, L2, L3, right? Do you see the T1 vertebra? It connects the rib number one to the manubrium of the sternum, right? And then we have the second rib, third rib, and then stay with me. I'm saying this for a reason. Fourth, fifth, and then the sixth rib, and then the seventh rib, right? Up until the seventh rib, they are directly connected to the sternum. Do you see that? So the first seven ribs are called true ribs because they have these costal cartilages and then they're directly connected to the sternum. Now, follow with me. Rib number 8, do you see hanging it from 7 and then 9 and then 10? Yes, they're sharing and then they're hanging from number 7 to be connected to the sternum, right? So these are part of the false ribs. They are ribs, but they're called false ribs because they're not attached to the, they're not directly attached to the sternum, okay? So these are called the vertebrochondral ribs, or just learn false ribs. And then everyone, if you look at T11 and T12 vertebra, again, we have two ribs coming out, right? The rib 11 and rib 12. But rib 11 comes and ends here, and then 12 comes and ends here. These are false ribs, but their name is what? Floating ribs, right? Because they're floating. They come and then they just stand there. They're floating. They're not connected to anything. And then everyone here, what are these cartilages called? What do we call the term that pertains to the ribs? Costal. So what are these cartilages? Costal cartilage, right? And then these are intercostal spaces. Don't worry about it. All right. Any questions here? Easy? Okay. And then everyone, what we're seeing here is a typical rib, okay? And then we said that the rib on one side, here it says junction with costal cartilage. So this side, okay, and then there's no facets here. This is the side where it's gonna be connected to costal cartilage and then the sternum, all right? And then this side, do you see where it has facets? This is the other side that's gonna go to the back and connect to the thoracic vertebra, okay? Does it make sense? Are we understanding? Right? So we have superior, inferior facets to articulate with the thoracic vertebra. We have other articular facets of transverse process. Okay, so these facets are gonna go back and be connected to the vertebra. Everyone here, this is the pectoral girdle. The reason why we're covering this image is because we're gonna cover the clavicle. So we said that the clavicle on one end is connected to the what? Specifically which part of the sternum? Manubrium. And then the other end is going to be connected to the shoulder. And then we're going to call it the acromion. Okay. And then the acromion is a bone that's part on it that is found on our scapula. Scapula is the shoulder blade. Okay. So it's going to be connected there on one end and then the manubrium on the other end. And next slide has a better image that we can see. Okay. And then this is just uh, we'll get there, but this is going to be the pectoral girdle. Okay, this is the pectoral girdle where we have this joint. The humerus is connected to the shoulder. Let's stick to the clavicle because that's what we're focusing on here. So everyone, this is the clavicle. It has the sternal clavicular joint because the clavicle is joining to the sternum. Do you see that? So it has an sternal end, which is the medial side of the clavicle. You can see here. And then the lateral side of the clavicle is going to be joined to the acromion bone, which is part of the scapula, which is the shoulder blade, okay, which makes the shoulder. It's called the acromioclavicular joint. So this is the sternoclavicular joint, this is the acromioclavicular joint, and then this is the clavicle. And then in the back, we have the scapula, which we're gonna talk about it, okay? So this is a magnified image. Do we see the clavicle clearly? And then how it's attached to the sternum and the acromion, okay? Which is part of the scapula. This is showing us the clavicle, superior view and inferior view, the medial and the lateral part. The medial is going to be the sternal end. The lateral is going to be the acromial end. And then here we have the structure of the scapula. So everyone, let's look at the scapula from the front and then sideways and then from the back. So this is anterior view of the scapula. And then this is not the one that we're most familiar with. When we talk about shoulder blades, this is what we see because the scapula is found on the posterior part of the body. It's all the way in the back. And then from the back, this is how we see it, right? This is how we see the scapula if you look at the skeletons from the back, right? So the one that we're seeing it anteriorly, we don't usually see it like that because you see the rib cage, the ribs, they are covering the scapula, like you can't see it, the anterior part of it clearly, right? But if you look at it from the front, okay, we have this fossa here. It means the surface, so that's the subscapular fossa. And then it's important to pay attention to which one is the medial side, which one is the lateral side. Medial side is going to be the side that is closer to the body, right? Medial, and then lateral is going to be on the side. And then this one, because it's an anterior view, look, this is the acromion, this is the shoulder. And then we have the coracoid process here. We're going to learn these names of these bones, all right? And then this is where the humerus gets attached to the scapula, right? That's why we call here the pectoral girdle. So that's why this side is the lateral, right? Lateral side, the shoulder side, and then this is the medial side, more closer to the middle, okay? And then everyone, since we started talking about this, let's cover this as well. So this acromion bone, it's on the scapula, but it's the bone that makes our shoulders, okay? And then here, part of the scapula, this part that is sticking out means process. It's called what? Coracoid process. It has a coracoid process. And then we're gonna see when we look at an like another view, we're gonna see this opening, which is called the glenoid cavity, which is where the ball and the socket joint is for the humerus to be connected to the shoulders. Okay. So this is it. This is the lateral view. So everyone, do you remember the acromion? That's which bone is that? That's what makes the shoulder, but it's part of what bone? Scapula. It's part of the scapula, okay? And then do you remember this part sticking out? That's the coracoid process. And then this part where we're gonna have a joint, the ball and the socket joint, it's gonna be called the glenoid cavity, okay? And then this is the back of the scapula. And then the scapula itself, this middle part of the scapula, it's called the spine. Okay, and then it's divided into superior and inferior. So this is called the supraspinous fossa, infraspinous fossa. Okay, so the superior one is called what? Supraspinous fossa, and then the bottom one is the infraspinous fossa, and then the middle is the spine. And then what is this bone here? Acromion. And then what was this cavity called? Glenoid cavity. Good, good. And then what is this process? Coracoid process. And then you can see because the glenoid cavity is on this side and then that's lateral. So this is going to be the lateral side of the scapula. This is going to be the medial side of the scapula, correct? All right, next. Okay, so here it's going to get a little bit difficult. Like I think this is the hardest part, but we can get through it, okay? The joints of the humerus connecting to the radius and the ulna, and then we might see something similar when we're covering the femur connected to the tibia and fibula, okay? But that's it. The rest are, I mean, you've been following along. How do you think so far? How are things so far? It's not bad, right? It's not too bad, right? It's not too bad. Let's say it that way, right? All right. So everyone, if you look at the humerus, do you remember like a cartoon bone or a typical bone that has this top part, the epiphysis, right? If we're gonna draw a bone, this is how we draw it, right? Okay, and then we draw them equally, but that's not how it really is, okay? One part is greater than the other part, okay? So if you look closely here, the humerus at the top, do you see this part is called the greater tubercle, right? And then this side is called the lesser tubercle, okay? So one is little bit higher than the other. It's not like the typical bone that we draw or we see in cartoons that they give to the dogs, right? So we have the greater what? Greater tubercle, lesser tubercle. And in the middle, we have the intertubercular sulcus, okay? It's not too bad because one is greater, one is lesser, and then in the middle, it's called it means in between, intertubercular sulcus. And then everyone, this is the head, and then this head is made up of hyaline cartilage, and then it's a type of a joint. And then do you see this head? That's the one that gets connected to which cavity? Glenoid cavity, right? And then it's a type of a joint. More specifically, it's a type of a synovial joint. And then more specifically, it's a type of a ball and socket synovial joint. And then when we get to the joints, we'll talk about it, okay? But whenever I get the chance, I'm throwing the names of the joints at you. So when we get there, you'll be like, oh, I saw this or I've heard about this, okay? All right. So here we have, and then this is the head of the humerus. This is the neck of the humerus. Okay, so the top of the humerus is really not bad, right? It has the greater tubercle, lesser tubercle, and intertubercular sulcus. And then at the end here, everyone, I'm going to make this as easy as possible. Do you remember the term condyle? We said that round uh, round, something round part of the bone that is sticking out, right? And then remember I said like a lot of places we're gonna see condyle, right? And then condyle is that round, circular shaped thingy. And then we see condyles in places where we have joints, okay? For example, do we have a joint here, right? And then do you feel like we have condyles here, like circular, round, right, thingies here that connects the joints together? All right. So this is so over here. Do you see this condyle here, right, sticking out? And then because that's lateral on the sideways, this is going to be called the lateral epicondyle. And then this side, because it's closer to the midline of the body, it's going to be called what? Medial epicondyle, okay? So what are these two? Lateral epicondyle, medial epicondyle, okay? And then if you, this is anterior view. If you look at the humerus as a posterior view in the back, do you see medial epicondyle and the lateral epicondyle? You can still see that, right? This pointy, round, circular thingy sticking out. And then the lateral and the medial, it makes it easy because lateral means facing out, like away from the body, medial, closer to the midline of the body. All right. And then we have some fossa that we have to learn. We have two fossa in the front, and then we have a fossa in the back. Fossa is this like opening, and then because there's going to be another bone on the other side with the same name that's going to be attached to this fossa, okay? For example, here we have radial fossa. This surface is called radial fossa. The term radial comes from radius, right? Because what we have here on this side that's going to be connected to the humerus, the thumb side, right? What do we have? The radius, right? So here we have the radial fossa. And then next to it, we have the coronoid fossa. And then we're going to see that on the other side, we have coronoid process, which is coronoid process sticking out. And then that's the fossa for it, okay? So what is this fossa here? Radial fossa. The one next to it is the coronoid fossa, okay? And then what are these sides? This is the lateral epicondyle, medial epicondyle, okay? All right, now posteriorly, what is this again? Medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle. We have another fossa here, and it's called the olecranon fossa. And then everyone, for the olecranon fossa, we're gonna have another bone on the ulna that's gonna have the olecranon, and the olecranon bone is gonna sit on the olecranon fossa, okay? So this one, everyone, the olecranon fossa and the olecranon is literally where we have our elbow, okay? Because this is the posterior. The olecranon is posterior, and then it's where we're gonna have the elbow, okay? And then I will show it in the, once we get comfortable with this and get down to the radius and the ulna, I'm gonna show you the connection between the two, okay? So let's review here. What do we have here? Lateral epicondyle, medial epicondyle, radial fossa, coronoid fossa. This is anterior. If we turn it to the back, we can still see the medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle, and then this is the olecranon fossa, okay? Now, one more thing that I want to add is, do you see this circle here? This circular thingy, it's called the capitulum, okay? The capitulum is going to sit on the radius. What is this called? Capitulum. And then next to it, we have something called the trochlea. The trochlea, we can also see the trochlea from posterior as well, okay? And then the trochlea, everyone, it's gonna sit on the ulna, we have trochlear notch. You remember notch, right? Trochlear notch. So the trochlea from the humerus is gonna sit on the trochlea notch of the ulna, okay? And then capitulum is gonna sit on the radius, okay? And then wherever we have the olecranon fossa, the head of the ulna has this part called olecranon. It's gonna sit on the olecranon fossa, okay? And then that's what makes the elbow, okay? It's the posterior side, all right? So let's review everything. This is the lateral epicondyle. This is the medial epicondyle. This is the radial fossa, coronoid fossa, medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle, olecranon fossa. This circle is the capitulum, and then this is the trochlea that's going to sit on the trochlear notch, which is on the ulna. Okay, good. And then the capitulum is going to sit on the radius. Okay, so how do we feel about this? I know, don't tell me how we feel about this. Are we a little bit comfortable? Okay, good. Just hang in there, really. This is like as hard as it gets, okay? And then we have one again when we are connecting the femur to the tibia and fibula, but that's it, okay? Okay, so this is the anterior view. We covered this, and then this is the posterior view. We covered this, okay? Now, let's not forget what do we have here so that we can connect the dots, like who's connecting to what, right? Remember the capitulum, here we're gonna have the radius, and then trochlea, trochlear notch, we're gonna have the ulna, and then the condyles, the radial fossa, the coronoid fossa, the olecranon fossa. All right, so everyone, now we are here where where the humerus is connecting to the radius and then the ulna, okay? So everyone, this is going to be the radial head. By the way, the ulnar head is at the bottom, okay? They're like swapped, okay? Radial head is up here, ulnar head is down here, but that's not too important for anything. But let's cover what we have here on the top, okay? So which bone is this? Radius. Which bone is this? The ulna, okay? And then what did we have here that sits on the radial head? The capitulum, right? And then do you remember the trochlea, right? What do we have here? Trochlear notch, right? On this end of the ulna, we have a trochlear notch. That's where the trochlear notch is gonna sit on the ulna, right? And then do you see here little bit, this part of the bone, anteriorly, it's called the olecranon, and then we can see it super clearly. The ulna here, this part of the ulna, it's called the olecranon, right? This is the posterior. So what did we have in the posterior side of the humerus? Olecranon fossa and the trochlea, right? So here we can see that we have a trochlear notch. That's where it's connected. And then this is the olecranon. It's gonna get connected to the olecranon fossa, okay? This picture here on the side, this is a good one that shows us the elbow, you know, the elbow that we have. So that's the humerus. And then do you see how we have the trochlear notch where trochlea is gonna sit on it? And also, this is the olecranon. This olecranon is gonna rest on the olecranon fossa, okay? And then that's what makes our elbow, okay? So are we all comfortable with this olecranon, right? And the trochlear notch, yes. And then this is the radial head. And then what does sit here? The capitulum of the humerus. And then this is the radius, okay? Actually, it's not too bad, right? The olecranon, the trochlear notch, and then on the head of the radius, the capitulum is gonna sit, and that's how the humerus is gonna be connected to the radius and the ulna, right? And then this is the radius, this is the ulna. I'm gonna introduce another joint here, but we're gonna cover it again. This part is called the interosseous membrane. What is it called? Interosseous membrane. This is a joint. Even though it's a joint, it doesn't move. Like you don't see your radius and your ulna moving, but it's a joint that keeps those bones together. And it's a type of fibrous joint. What type of a joint is it? Fibrous joints, okay? Because you know the other ones I was telling you, those are cartilaginous joints, right? They're made with cartilage tissues, right? This one is fibrous tissues, okay? So it's fibrous joints. All right, and then if we go down here, right, again, this is the radius, this is the ulna. Now let's see how the ending of the radius and ulna, because they're going to be connected to the carpal bones, right, and then metacarpals and phalanges, right? That's what we have coming up. So everyone, there's not much going on here except for, do you remember the ear pods, the styloid process, that thing sticking out? So we have something here called radial styloid process. Do you see that down here? So radial styloid process. And then what is this side called? Ulnar styloid process, because it's part of ulna, okay? And then this is the joint where the radius and the ulna joins together. And then again, posteriorly, you can see the ulnar styloid process and radial styloid process, okay? So everyone, the anterior view, so remember this is the radial head, the capitulum sits on it. And then on the other side of the humerus, we had the capitulum, we had the radial fossa and the lateral epicondyle. The other side where we have the ulna, we have the olecranon, we have the trochlear notch. But on the humerus side, we had the trochlea, and then we had the coronoid fossa. Do you remember the coronoid fossa, right? And then do you see the coronoid process here? I'm not sure if we covered this. Do you see the coronoid process here, right? Because what did we have up here? Coronoid fossa, okay? So we have the coronoid process there. And then trochlear notch, it's going to be connected to the trochlea. And then olecranon is going to sit on the olecranon fossa, okay? And then at the bottom here, what do we have? Radial and ulnar styloid process, okay? Good. And then this is posteriorly. Look, posteriorly, we can see the olecranon that makes the elbow, okay? And then also we have the condyles on the sides, right? That makes that round part, and then it creates joints between the bones. And then down here, we can see ulnar styloid process and radial styloid process. And then this is the same one magnified, how the ulna has the olecranon, and then it sits on the olecranon fossa, and then how the trochlear notch, trochlea sits on the trochlear notch of the, not the radius, the ulna, okay? The radius is the capitulum sits on the radius. So everyone, this is what we've been saying, but without seeing the actual image, right? So here you can see, what was this part here? Lateral, epicondyle, medial, epicondyle, radial, fossa, coronoid, fossa, capitulum, trochlea, and then capitulum sits on the radius, right? And then here we have the trochlear notch, but it's not showing it, right? But we also have the coronoid process where we have the coronoid fossa, right? And then this is our radius, this is our ulna, and then this is where we have the radius and the ulna, they join together. And then this is posteriorly, this is the medial epicondyle, this is the lateral epicondyle, this is the olecranon fossa, this is part of ulna, this is the olecranon, right? And then this is the radius, and then yeah, that's it. This is how much it shows because it's posterior. And then everyone down there, it's going to be connected, the ulna and the radius are going to be connected to the carpal bones, and then these are the carpal bones. We have the trapezoid, trapezium, pisiform, hamate, capitate, triquetrum, and lunate. So technically, these are part of the curriculum. We have to know all the names of these bones, but I don't think I've asked those on the exam, but please study, be familiar. You're supposed to know these. I just haven't asked, and I'm trying to be nice here. And then carpals, metacarpals. Do you see the first half of the fingers? Metacarpals are very easy to label. They are metacarpal number 1, metacarpal 2, metacarpal 3, metacarpal 4, metacarpal 5. And then the phalanges are the top ends of our fingers. We have proximal, middle, and distal phalanges. Okay? And then what do we call the thumb? Pollex. Okay? And yeah, this is the same one, different view. The same one, different view. So we are supposed to know the carpal bones and then be familiar with it. But I'm not I don't think there's a question on the exam where I'm asking you to label any one of these carpal bones, okay? So if you want to like stress out and skip something, you can just skim through those, okay? All right. And then before we reach the femur and the tibia and the fibula, I just want to cover real quick our pelvic bone. So everyone, do you remember the vertebra? After we finish the lumbar, we have the sacrum, right? And then we have the coccyx. And then on the side, we have the pelvic bone. And then I said the pelvic bone, we're going to see the difference. There is a difference in the anatomy of the pelvic bone between male and female. We're going to see these differences. The pelvis, everyone, it has a greater pelvis, which is this part here, and then it has a lesser pelvis. And then you can tell how when I projected here, the colors are off because it says the greater pelvis is blue, and then in our slides is probably blue, and then here it's a purple, and then this green is orange here, right? But for my recording, I think it's showing the correct colors, so I'm gonna go off of that. So the blue one here, so this side, everyone, it's the greater pelvis, which is the false pelvis, and then the real pelvis is, the true pelvis is this inside part that we have, okay? And then this is gonna be the pelvic bone, which is what we're gonna focus on next. And then the pelvic bone here plays a big role because we have a joint here on the pelvis, an opening, a cavity where the femur's head attaches to it, and then we have another ball and socket joint, okay? Remember the glenoid cavity and then the head of the humerus, how it's set on the shoulder, and then we had this synovial joint or the ball and socket joint. Another one that we have is when the femur, where the femur is attached to our hips, right? That's another one of ball and socket joint because we can move our legs however way we want it to, right? Just like this joint compared to the other joints that we can't move as much, right? For example, we have a knee joint, which is also a synovial joint, but it doesn't have that ball and socket, like it doesn't go all around, right? The knee only goes like front and back, right? But whereas here, I can go all around, right? The leg, you can go all around, right? So we're gonna talk about what's happening here as well, okay? So this is the pelvis. Okay, and then we're gonna cover the 3 parts of the pelvic bone, everyone. This top part is called the ilium. This top part is called the ilium. And then here we have the ischium. And then here we have the pubis. Okay, so what are they? This top part is the ilium. This part is the ischium. And then this part is the pubis, okay? So these are the 3 parts of the pelvic bone. Let's make sure we know that. Another thing that I ask here is this joint here, okay? This is let me remember, this is a cartilaginous joint, okay, that joins the left and right pelvic bones together, okay? It's called the pubic symphysis. What is the name of the joint that joins the left and right pelvis together? Pubic symphysis. It's made up of a cartilaginous joints, and it's one of the joints that we're gonna cover today, okay? And then everyone, do you see this part where it says acetabellum? Okay, that acetabellum, there's one here and then there's one here. It's that opening where the head of the femur is gonna sit there. Okay, and then I think in the next slide we'll see it better. So not this one, But this one, let's review. We have the ilium, we have the ischium, and we have the pubis, correct? On one side, on the right pelvic bone. And then also, if we look at it laterally, do you all see the acetabellum, right? This is where we're going to have a ball and socket joint where the femur is going to get attached to the pelvis. So that's it. This is the same image magnified. This is the same image magnified, okay? So do you all see the acetabellum, right? Where the femur's head is going to sit there and then make that ball and socket joint, okay? And then some differences between the anatomy of the pelvis between male and female, everyone. And then you can tell like females anatomy, the anatomy of the female's pelvis is built differently because of the function that it serves, right? To give birth, obviously. So here you can see the female pelvis is wide, the greater pelvis, and then the male pelvis is, the anatomy of the male pelvis is narrow. And then the sacrum, here you see the sacrum here, it's wider and shorter for the female anatomy, and then it's narrower and longer for the male anatomy. The acetabellum, you know, acetabellum where like the legs are attached, okay? For female anatomy, they're further apart where the legs are attached. But for the male anatomy, they're closer together where the legs are attached. Look here, closer together. And then the pelvic inlet is here where we have the, what was this joint again? Pubic symphysis, right? So this pelvic inlet, this has more oval shape so that it can, you know, expand for here, this part. And then for male anatomy, it has a heart shape. And then look at this pubic arc here. It opens up to 90 to 100 degrees angle. And then this goes up to 60 to 70, right? And then all of this is, again, because the structure defines the function. All right. So let's do this, the last hard part, and then we're going to cover the joints. So everyone, what is this bone here? That's the femur, okay? The leg bone, upper leg. That's the femur. And then everyone, this is the head of the femur. It's called the fovea capitis. And then this head of the femur, where is it gonna sit? Glenoid is up here. So this one is called which one? Acetabellum, okay? Good job. So that's where the fovea capitis of the femur's head is gonna sit here and make that ball and socket joint, okay? And this is very similar to the glenoid cavity where the humerus, the hyaline cartilage sits on it. This is type of a synovial joint, and specifically which type of synovial joint? It's the ball and socket, okay? Those two are the ones that they can move, I don't know, all the angles, okay? So, all right, and then, so that's the head. And then everyone, do you remember for the humerus, that top part, I said they're not equal, right? We had the greater tubercle and lesser tubercle, right? We have something similar here, but for the femur, it's not called tubercle, it's called trochanter. So we have a greater trochanter and lesser trochanter. And then in the middle, we have intertrochanteric line, okay? So what is it called? Greater trochanter, which we'll see it here. And then we have the lesser trochanter. This is the posterior, by the way. I'm covering anterior and posterior at the same time, and whichever we see it better, okay? So this is the head, and then what did we say? This is the greater trochanter, and then we have the lesser trochanter here, and then this is the intertrochanter line or crest in this side. And then if we go down here, everyone, now let's focus on the anterior view of the end of the femur. All right, here, the anterior view of the end of the femur. And then we're gonna see that we have condyles again, okay? Because it's an attachment. And then this is easy. What is this side called? Lateral epicondyle. This side is called medial epicondyle. Easy, right? Do you see fossa or anything like that? There's nothing, okay? This is an easy one. At the end of the femur, just like the end of the humerus, we have lateral epicondyle, medial epicondyle without the fossa, because we did have a fossa in the humerus. And then what do we have here in the front of the femur, where we have the knee? The patella, okay? Good. Now let's look at the femur, but posteriorly from the back, where we don't have a patella, right? So what is this here? The medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle. And then everyone, if you look at lower than that, okay? Again, this is not hard. It's the same name. Instead of epicondyle, it's just condyle, okay? So this is the medial condyle. This is the lateral condyle. And then in between, it's intercondylar fossa. Okay? Medial condyle, lateral condyle, intercondylar fossa. Okay? That's it. How do we feel about this? Better? Right? Good. So lateral condyle, medial condyle, and then we have the patella. We can't see the medial condyle and the lateral condyle anteriorly because it's covered with the patella. But if we look at it posteriorly, we can see medial condyle, lateral condyle, and we can see the medial condyle, lateral condyle, and intercondylar fossa. Okay? And then these are going to be connected to what? This side is going to be the tibia. No, after the knee, sorry. It's going to be the tibia, and then this side is going to be the fibula, right? Tibia is the inside, the side where we have the big toe, and then the other one is the underside, okay? So everyone, greater trochanter, lesser trochanter, trochanter line, lateral epicondyle, medial epicondyle, and then the patella. Posteriorly, greater trochanter, lesser trochanter, and then medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle, medial condyle, lateral condyle, intercondylar fossa. And then which bone is this? Patella. Okay. And then, all right, the last part, now we have the femur is going to be connected to the tibia. What is this? This is the tibia, and then this is the fibula, okay? And then remember, for where we had the femur, okay, here we had the fibula, patella, and also we had medial epicondyle and lateral epicondyle, right? That's what we saw on anteriorly, right? So what do we see here? Do you remember we had intercondylar fossa posteriorly? Intercondylar fossa. Okay, it means that the other side we're gonna see intercondylar process, okay? So here you can see the actually it's not a process, it's called eminence, intercondylar eminence, okay? But everyone, this side is also not hard, it's very easy because look, this is the tibia, this is the fibula, and then do you see here the lateral condyle, medial condyle, right? And then this is just the joint between the tibia and fibula. And then on this side, okay, do you see the medial condyle and the lateral condyle, okay? And here it has an articular surface of medial condyle and lateral condyle, because if you look at it posteriorly, do you remember posteriorly, not only we have medial epicondyle, we also have medial condyle. Not only we have lateral epicondyle, we also have lateral condyle, okay? So here we also have medial condyle, lateral condyle, but we also have these surfaces where the femurs, medial condyle and lateral condyle can sit there. And then here we have the intercondylar eminence, okay? And then everyone, what is this joint between the tibia and the fibula? It's made up of what? Interosseous membrane, which is an example of a fibrous joint, okay? Fibrous joint. So far, if you caught up, I've named 3 types of joints: fibrous joint, cartilaginous joint, and synovial joint, okay? Fibrous joint is the stuff like this where it doesn't move, like the interosseous membrane. Cartilaginous joints, we saw a lot of them, intervertebral discs, costal cartilage, pubic symphysis, right? Those are all cartilaginous joints. Um, Synovial joints, we mentioned where the humerus sits on the shoulder, the glenoid cavity, right? Another synovial joint, another ball and socket example is the acetabellum, where the fovea capitis, the head of the femur, sits there, right? So that's another example. All right, let's finish this. Everyone down here where the tibia and the fibula connects to the tarsal, metatarsal, and phalanges, okay? Remember, it was, for the other one, it was the styloid process, the ear pod terms, right? This one, it's not called that, okay? It's called malleolus. And then I don't have anything for malleolus, just malleolus, okay? So lateral malleolus and medial malleolus, okay? And then lateral, medial malleolus and lateral malleolus, okay? So the end of the tibia and the fibula is called malleolus, all right? And then for the humerus, no, for the, ulna and the radius, it's called styloid process, okay? Medial styloid process and lateral styloid process, okay? Here, this is lateral malleolus and medial malleolus, okay? So these are gonna be connected to the tarsals. And then, so the tarsals are, these are the tarsals, everyone. We have the calcaneus, that's the heel bone. That's the talus, navicular, cuboid, medial, cuneiform, intermediate cuneiform, lateral cuneiform. So these are the tarsals, and then we're supposed to know it, but I don't think I've asked on the exam. And then metatarsals, we have metatarsal 1, metatarsal 2, metatarsal 3, metatarsal 4, metatarsal 5. We have the phalanges, which is proximal, middle, and distal, okay? So this is the ankle and the foot. All right, and then everyone, next I want to cover the joints. And then for me to cover the joints, I want you to look at your handouts. If you go all the way to the back where, right after the part where we label the foot part, here, do you see this table here, right? And then it's right before the summary table, okay? So if you open from the back, it's not this table. We're gonna come back to this table, and then I'm talking about this table here. Okay, if you look at this table here, these 2 pages, and then look at the 2 pages at the same time, okay? This table is, by the way, this is like your study guide, right? So this page has a table, and then on this side of the table, we can see 1, 2, and 3 types of joints. What is the first one here? Fibrous joints, right? And then what's the second one? Cartilaginous joints. And then what's the third one? Synovial joints, okay? So if you look at the fibrous joints, okay, we have 3 types of fibrous joints, okay? What are these 3 types of fibrous joints? What's the first one? So yeah, so we have actually fibrous joints. We have fibrous joints that are immovable. They don't move at all, but they're a joint. They connect things together. And we have slightly movable. So the immovable ones are called synarthrosis, and the slightly movable ones are called amphiarthrosis, okay? So what are 2 examples of synarthrosis, immovable fibrous joints? The suture, does the suture move? It doesn't move, but does it hold 2 bones together? Yes, right? That's a fibrous joint. What about the tooth socket? Does it move? Right? This is called gomphosis. It's an example of fibrous joint. And then the last one, it says slightly movable. And then which one is that? It's called syndesmosis, right? But what is the type of the membrane that makes that joint? Do you remember the interosseous membrane? I kept pointing that out when we were doing the radius and the ulna, or the tibia and the fibula. the interosseous membrane, right? This is the interosseous membrane. So one of the joints is the fibrous joints. The fibrous joints has three types of joints, right? One is the suture, right? Another one is the interosseous membrane. This is the suture again. And this is the gomphosis, which is the tooth and socket. This is syndesmosis, which is the um, interosseous membrane, okay? By the way, everything that we saw here, it's in this table. Did you see that? Right? Okay. So are we okay with the fibrous joints, the suture, gomphosis, and syndesmosis? And then example of each, such as the cranial suture or gomphosis is going to be the tooth socket, and syndesmosis is going to be that joint between the fibula and the tibia, or ulna and the radius, the interosseous membrane, which we're seeing on the slide. All right, what's the second type of joint? Cartilaginous joint. And then cartilaginous joints, we have synarthrosis and amphioarthrosis. Synarthrosis means immovable. Amphioarthrosis means slightly movable, okay? So let's look at this. So from the synarthrosis one, we have synchondrosis. So everyone, we have remember the epiphyseal plate, right? Remember I said that's made up of cartilaginous tissues, right? And then as long as it's a still plate, not a line, it means that it can, the bone can still grow, right? That's one. And then another example of a cartilaginous joint that is also synchondrosis is going to be the costal cartilage. Do you see these costal cartilages? Right, that joins the ribs to the sternum, right? And then we have symphysis, and then for the symphysis, those are slightly movable. For example, what is the cartilage between the vertebra? Intervertebral discs, right? Those are made up of cartilaginous tissues, and they are joints, right? And then we can move, right? But not a lot, but we can move our backs, right? And then what about the joint that joins the right and pelvic bones together? Pubic symphysis, right? And then this one also, it's slightly movable. It expands especially during birth, okay? So this is the same image. This is the epiphyseal plate. This is the costal cartilage, all made up of cartilage, intervertebral disc, and pubic symphysis, all made up of cartilage, okay? All right, good. What's the third type of joint? Synovial joint, okay? So everyone, for the synovial joint, is the one that it's freely movable. And then I know this page looks like synovial joint is like the easiest one, but we have 6 types of synovial joints, okay? So let's go to the next page, okay? Let's go to the next page where we have the table. So in this table, everyone, this should be very familiar to you. Do you see the fibrous joints, the suture, the tooth socket, gomphosis, and the syndesmosis where we have the interosseous membrane? Do we see that? And then at the bottom, do we see the cartilaginous joint, right? The 2 types. And then if you go to the last page here, okay, this is the 6 types of synovial joints. Okay, how many types of synovial joints do we have? 6, okay? And then synovial joints are the ones that are freely movable. Like for example, and then these are the different types. We have plane, we have hinge, we have pivot, we have condylar, we have saddle, and then ball and socket. The ball and the socket one, it's, remember the glenoid cavity and the acetabellum where the femur is attached and the humerus is attached? That's the ball and the socket. The second one, do you see where it says the hinge joint? That's the elbow and that's the knee. It only goes like this, right? And then, for example, we have the plane one like this, or pivot. It means like it's It stands like this, but it turns around itself. Biaxial, condylar, and then we have a saddle, and then we have ball and socket, okay? So let's look at some examples of, but all of these are types of synovial joints, but there's different types depending on what type of movement, how much it can move, okay? So for example, this is the knee. What type of a joint it is? Fibrous, cartilaginous, or synovial? And then out of the synovial, it's gonna be the hinge one because the knee moves only like this, right? Or this one, this is our pectoral girdle, right? Where we have the humerus attached to the shoulder. This is a synovial joint, but out of the six, which one does it represent? The last one, right? The ball and the socket. And then this is showing us, okay, I'm gonna start going like just fast because those are not as important. So the next one is gonna be the hinge one. The hinge is the second one, uniaxial. So the elbow is hinge and then the knee is hinge, okay? And then here we have biaxial, which is the condylar. And then these are the movements. And then other types of gliding synovial joints, and then different movements. Those are all, everything you're seeing here, we can do those because of the synovial joints, okay? Okay. Is that because of gas bubbles? Hmm. I can look into it after this. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Okay, everyone, this is a good slide because it has all six types of synovial joints. Do you see that? Non-axial plane, hinge joint. The hinge is the elbow or the knee, pivot joint. Look where we have the dance and the C1, C2, condylar joint or biaxial joint, saddle joint, and this is the ball and the socket. This is a popular one for the shoulder or for the femur, right, where it's connected to the hip. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 types of joints, okay? And then this is the table that you saw on the last 2 pages of your packet. You can see the fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints, and you can see the 6 types of synovial joints, okay? And then everyone, the rest of the slides, don't pay too much attention to it. It's just showing us like, okay, this is the synovial joint where you have your olecranon, trochlea, and then you can do the hinge uh, uh, way of the synovial joint for the elbow, and then here, or for the knee. But don't worry about those. It's showing us the ball and the socket. Look, do you see here the shoulder, right? The ball and the socket. This is a cadaver picture. Do you see how they're connected? And then this is the acetabulum where the femur is connected. You see that? This is a cadaver image. That's the pelvic bone. That's the acetabulum. And that's the fovea capitis, the head of the femur that's connected to it. Okay? All right, everyone. So that is the end of the Lab 5, the skeletal system.